This is LGBTQ plus voice authors and artists panel. And our first panelist is author Carter Sickels. Carter Sickels is the author of the novel The Prettiest Star, published by Hub City Press in 2020. His debut novel, The Evening Hour, published by Bloomsbury in 2012, is an Oregon Book Award finalist and a Lambda Literary Award finalist, and it was adapted into a feature film that premiered at the 2020 Sundance Film Festival. His essays and fiction have appeared in a variety of publications, including The Atlantic, Oxford American, Poets and Writers, BuzzFeed, Joyland, Guernica, Catapult, and Electric Literature. Carter is the recipient of the 2013 Lambda Literary Emerging Writer Award and earned fellowships from the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, the Sewanee Writers Conference, the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, and McDowell. He is an assistant professor of English at Eastern Kentucky University, and we welcome Carter to our panel. Our second panelist is musician Sam Gleaves. Sam Gleaves is a singer, songwriter, and multi-instrumentalist, originally from Wytheville, Virginia, and I hope I said that correctly, Sam. He began playing old-time Appalachian music as a teenager, reveling in the beauty of mountain dance tunes, Carter family songs, and the deep stories surrounding the music. While studying folklore at Berea College, Sam performed with the Berea College Bluegrass Ensemble directed by Al White. Sam has toured throughout the United States, and he has performed in Ireland, England, Canada, Japan, and Italy. Sam has released 5 studio recordings, including his critically acclaimed debut, Ain't We Brothers. He currently serves as Appalachian Instruments Instructor and Bluegrass Ensemble Director at Berea College, and we welcome Sam to the panel. And our third panelist is Bob Morgan, visual artist. Robert Morgan's family goes back to the early pioneers of central Kentucky and the mountains of Appalachia. He was shaped by his Catholic childhood, Haight-Ashbury in the 60s, and the AIDS epidemic of the 1990s. Now in his 70s, Bob has been an LGBTQ activist since before Stonewall. Bob's mother, Elizabeth, an artist from the Troublesome Creek community of Breathitt County, Kentucky, taught him art. And as a teen, he was taken in by artist Henry Faulkner, who taught him the skills to survive as a gay man. He began collecting found objects and trinkets as a child and arranged them into small bedside altars. This process remains the basis for Bob's iconic sculptures today, and his pieces tell new and ancient stories of love and loss, stories of birth, death, and rebirth. And we welcome Bob to the panel as well. All right. Well, let's see. Now we have our panelists here, and we also have our interpreter, Dana Barr. So welcome, Carter and Sam and Bob. I'd like to get started with some questions here. Our first question today is, how has being part of the LGBTQ plus community shaped your creative work? And Carter, we can start with you.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, I want to say it's great to be here and so nice to be here with Sam and Bob. And thank you. Yeah, I think that who I am, my queer identity and my experiences have informed how I see the world, and that has informed my creative work. So my novel, The Prettiest Star, is about the AIDS epidemic of the 80s and 90s. And I also write often in that book and other works about kind of the queer and rural intersection. That's something I'm really interested in, and I feel like we don't see enough of in fiction. So queer people living in rural and Appalachian places, because I think we need to see our lives and experiences represented. And as a queer trans man who grew up in a rural conservative area, I want to share my voice and write about my experiences and I'm often writing about this kind of masculinity and ideas about what it means to be a man. So I'm writing queer and straight characters and cis and trans characters. So yeah, I think it has very much shaped who I am as an artist and as a writer.
Fantastic. Sam, what about you?
Well, I grew up in a small town in southwestern Virginia. You pronounced it correctly, Robert. Yeah, it's Withville, Virginia, right on the edge of the Blue Ridge Mountains, and grew up playing old time music there. And that's what drew me to enroll at Berea College, because there's the bluegrass ensemble there, and I was interested in playing in a band and studying Appalachian music. And so I came to Berea, and that's when I really began to realize that my music identity, my identity as an Appalachian person, and my identity as a musician didn't have to be separate. That my identity as a gay man didn't have to be separate from those things. You know, that I could at once be out, be openly gay, be a songwriter, and someone who admires old traditional songs and learns them, but also writes new stories in song. Berea was really the place where I was exposed to activism and art being combined, because my mentor and friend Silas House, I worked with him and took a number of classes with him, and Jason Howard also, and they really influenced me to open up and to share about issues that I care about in music.
Fantastic. Bob, how about you?
Well, you know, my identity as an artist and as a gay man were synonymous, and from the beginning. But I paid a big price for that in my acceptance in the academic circles of arts community, and you know, you would have thought, you know, being involved before Stonewall, I would have felt like I helped build the gay community, but actually I was taken in and tutored by people born even in the 1800s, who were old men who told me stories when I was a young teenager, and men who were in their 80s who had lived gay lives in another era. And I wasn't sure the future would ever bring what we see today as the gay community. So, you know, I had to make a commitment to possibly going it alone, you know. And so that sets up a whole lot of obstacles, but in some ways it sets up a freedom that an unexpected freedom.
Oh, well, that's fantastic. And you've discovered along the way that you are not alone, for sure. But even though I know it feels that way sometimes. Our next question here is, and maybe we'll start, Sam, I'll start with you. I'll just sort of mix things up here. Do you consider yourself an LGBTQ plus artist or musician, or do you happen to be a musician who happens to belong to the LGBT plus community?
I think that's a great question. So I don't think artists like to be pigeonholed, you know, or like placed in a boundary of being an LGBT artist only. But I believe that sexuality just informs our way of being in every way. I think it really permeates everything that I do and that, you know, we do. But then I've also had the experience of learning old time music in the homes of people. I think of a mentor of mine who's quite conservative, you know, who's really devout Church of God woman, you know, and she taught me a lot of old time gospel songs and a way of singing that is old and very beautiful. And I would never be out to her, you know. I thought about taking my partner to visit her once, you know, but it's just, I have had to navigate some spaces in the old time music community where I was not out, and I have also been out and said on the stage that I'm queer and was pictured dancing with my boyfriend at the time on the cover of the Old Time Herald one time, so that was kind of hard to hide. So, you know, there's just, it's very complicated for me, and I really don't know. I would say it depends on the context.
Okay. Bob, what about you? Do you
My
see
camera
yourself?
my camera seems to have frozen again. Can you still hear me?
I can still hear you. Absolutely.
Okay, super. Then I'm not going to worry about the camera.
No.
You know, I have relished being able to think of myself as a wild queer artist for a long time. And at a time when queer was not used within the gay community. And so I have like always felt like that was a part of my life that needed to be pushed to the nth degree. And I haven't hidden my identity from anybody in so long. I can't imagine how to go about doing it anymore.
That's fantastic. What about Carter? What about you?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great question, and Bob's answer so inspiring to me. I think probably both. Like, I consider myself a writer, and I consider myself a queer writer. And I think that my views have shifted a little bit. I think earlier in my career, I felt very strongly about being just like a writer first who happened to be queer, who happened because of kind of what Sam was saying. I was resisting being pigeonholed or just sort of stuck on one sort of shelf in the bookstore. But I think like my own sort of understanding of myself has evolved, and also I think the conversation now, and there's is more inclusive, and there's bigger space for queer writers than there was in like the 90s or the early 2000s. So yeah, I do think of myself, I guess, as a queer writer, but it's more than just like a label, right? Like it feels more essential than that and bigger than that. And it's, you know, I want to write for the queer community, but I also don't want to be like stuck in this little corner. And I think it's important to engage with other queer writers, but also, you know, to make straight readers and straight publishing also have to engage with queer writers.
Sure. Sounds like it's a conversation and a process that you have to have with yourself, you know, about the direction you want to go. At this point, do we have any questions from our attendees? And if we don't at this time, we'll continue on. So the next question here, and I'm going to start with you, Bob. How have you used your craft to raise awareness or advocate for the LGBTQ plus community?
Well, you know, I need to interject here that at one time I had become so disabled with drug addiction and alcoholism, I was unable to even make art. And that happened to line up almost perfectly with the onslaught of the early part of the AIDS epidemic. And by the time I got to the point where the world that I knew was burning around me, I had a complete breakdown, and caring for sick and dying buddies and lovers and friends. And I had to slowly claw my way back to being able to survive at all. You know, I didn't think the gay community would survive. I had spent years trying to convince young gay people to come out of the closet, to live gay lives. And then I felt an unbelievable guilt and responsibility for their contracting AIDS and dying before me, especially when I did not die. And, you know, and so I made a vow at a certain point there that I would never let the world forget their stories or what happened to them. And when I was able to finally come back to making art again with a vengeance, I had stories of insanity, madness, and agonizing deaths to tell. And I had to figure out a way to tell that story to the community at large and have them want to hear it and ask for more. And so it was an incredible challenge, and I still go back to that source of enlightenment and energy to today. You know, that's plenty.
Carter, what about you? How have you used your craft to raise awareness or to advocate for the community?
I think, yeah, through just the writing that I do about queer experiences and characters, telling queer stories, I'm trying to raise awareness that way. So, you know, it's most meaningful to me when my work connects and reaches to LGBTQ people and communities, and there's a special kind of connection I feel when I hear back from a queer person, especially someone living in Appalachia or a rural area, who feels like I've spoken to them or they've seen some piece of themselves in my work, or another way of kind of envisioning or imagining their lives. And then I think because I'm also a professor, and I am very out as professor and as a writer, and so I go to, well, you know, I went to physical events before. Now it's all virtual. But, you know, doing panels like this, I try to be a real advocate. And I've had parents come up to me afterwards to talk to me about their trans kids, or trans people from like very rural areas who've never really seen another trans person who's like a model of that, someone who's living, you know, a moderately successful and happy life, and to try to be, you know, have a role model in that way.
Great. What about you, Sam? And also your camera, let's make sure we can see your entire face there. I can only see part of your face.
Oh, okay. I'll lean in here.
We want to see it all.
Thank you. So when I started writing songs when I was a teenager, I was writing them on the back of like my worksheets in math class and stuff. And I was just letting out of me, you know, what the, you know, the difficulties of coming of age and being a human being, but also coming to terms with my queerness. And I came out to my family in high school, with the exception of my grandparents. And my grandmother is my greatest mentor in life, and especially music. She encouraged me to sing from an early age, and she's a musician. And so when I was about to record my first record in 2014, I was in the process of recording, and I thought, well, I cannot release this and not be out to my grandmother, because this is going to be I don't want my grandmother to read in the news that her grandchild is gay, you know? So I came out to her, and we talked about it, and she affirmed that she loved me as she always had. And I'm so fortunate to have had the family experience that I've had all around. But yeah, just, I mean, I think just by singing love songs that are queer in and of themselves, I've sometimes felt like I was representing in a way, or a lot of my work has centered around this song that I wrote called Ain't We Brothers, which is about a coal miner from southern West Virginia who's an openly gay man. And some people also have, since his name is Sam, also have confused me with him, which is pretty funny. Some people have written me cards and said, were you a coal miner? Or you know, things like that. But anyway, so and one of the things I was proudest of was I wrote a song about the shooting in the Pulse nightclub in Orlando in 2016, I think. And a colleague of mine at Berea College, Dr. Lindsay Claver, this is when I was, you know, not even working at the college. She arranged that for a chorus, and the Berea College Concert Choir sang that song, and I got to sing it with them, and that really meant a lot to me. And I've gotten to tour with some elders who are queer performers, who like Peggy Seeger, who's a real inspiration to me, and other performers who are straight who have stood up for queer rights. But also like Kathy Fink and Marcy Marks are two of my greatest mentors, and they've taught me a lot about how to subtly but firmly be who you are in the music scene.
Wow. Any questions from our attendees at this point? I've seen some comments there in the chat there. So, well, let's move on with our next question here. And Carter, I'll start with you. How have you used your social platforms to foster LGBTQ plus community activism and allyship?
What are you talking about, like social media?
Sure. Yeah. That's it. I guess that's one facet of it, you know, or whatever platform you've created for yourself through, through your writing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, well, sort of the bigger platform is just feeling connected to a writing community, and then a writing and queer community. And sometimes those overlap and sometimes they don't, but trying to, show up for other writers and promote their work is important to me. So that feels like a way to, foster some sort of allyship and community, and sort of drawing connections between people. I think it's I guess, like, I just try to show up as much as possible, and right now that may mean on a virtual platform, but I think just showing up for each other, whether it's the Appalachian community, the larger writing community, or the queer community, feels necessary and part of who I am and my work.
Well, that's a good point. Showing up is maybe the first step there to, encouraging activism. So, Bob, what about you?
How are my vocals sounding?
Vocals sound great. And,
Okay, great.
the frozen picture we have, or image of you, is just fantastic. So
I'm not going to worry about it. If you live long enough, life spreads out in lots of different directions. And I inadvertently helped found the Gay and Lesbian Archive of Kentucky, that's named after me and Henry Faulkner, named Faulkner Morgan Archive. And, that really began as just my involvement in my life with Henry Faulkner and inheriting lots of his personal papers and photographs and things when he died that I was never sure the world would be ready to see. And watch out, once again, as you grow older, amazing things are able to be shown in the world, and the history of his amazing out and in-your-face gay life that I had preserved with great love. And then, people with interest in gay history wanted to know about me as an artist in my life. And I eventually gave to an archive, which I mentioned, about 11,000 pieces. And then, I loved being able to step in as a spokesperson for that archive, and known as an artist and promoted through all of my my art connections. And so that has been really something. And and having being friends with other gay artists in Kentucky and collecting a lot of their work. The archive that I'm involved with is visually very rich with images of art and photography. And I also was able to save like boxes of photographs and scrapbooks and stuff from people who died and their families threw out all of their evidence of their gay life for the trash man. And I would go in the middle of the night and go through their trash and save all of their photographs and scrapbooks and things. Was able to preserve an entire time of gay history and life in central Kentucky that would have been erased entirely. And so I had to learn how to use social media real well to be right on the cusp of promoting gay history and gay history from a place that the rest of the world sees as so dark and evil as Kentucky. They're so surprised we have such a rich and wonderful gay history. So
thank you for saving that history.
Sure.
And sharing that. It is so important that these voices and experiences not be lost. So, Sam, what about you?
Well, I just want to say thank you again to Bob. I'm really, really moved by what you've just said and want to see the Faulkner Morgan archive someday. So maybe, or I hope that to make that happen. Um, one thing that comes to mind immediately is there's a great group called the Stay Project that stands for Stay Together Appalachian Youth. And so the Stay Project was founded originally by a group of young people who wanted to create a network. So young people who wanted to stay in the Appalachian region and make their communities more socially inclusive, environmentally safe, and, you know, make Appalachia a place where young people can thrive together and celebrate diversity, those sorts of things. And so Apple Shop and the Highlander Research and Education Center and High Rocks Education Corporation in West Virginia, all of them came together and sponsored this group, the Stay Project. Ada Smith was the initial lead organizer, and I was really honored to serve on the steering committee of that organization for several years, and that was the place where I met more queer Appalachian people and artists and activists than I had ever met before. And they continue to do that. So they have an event, Appalachian Love Fest, which is usually in February around Valentine's Day. And so that celebrates art made by young people from Appalachia. And it's a wonderful network for sustaining that kind of collaboration and energy. So I always just want to lift up the Stay Project. And also my friend Ray Gehringer, Country Queers Project, which was connected to a lot of the Stay Project people. And so Ray has recorded oral history interviews with LGBTQIA plus people all over the rural United States, but especially in Appalachia. Ray is from West Virginia. So, anytime a friend calls me and says, like, can we do some kind of event for Stay or for Country Queers or, something like that, I'm always honored to play music and participate and love the chance to, or Just Fun, Kentucky, like Bob Morgan was saying. There's so many great organizations in our region that are trying to bring queer people together, and any way that I can play music and be part of that, I am honored to.
It's great to know that there are so many resources now for people in rural areas and regions of the state that where you may have had a hard time, coming out or feeling support and accepted, and particularly for young people. I think that is so important, and this generation is so fortunate to have. Such a great group of activists and allies from the generation before. We've got another question for you here, and we don't have too much longer together, but I want to get through another question or two. And Sam, we want to hear you play before our session is over today. You've tuned up your instrument, and we heard a little snippet earlier before the session started, so we can't wait to hear you. But I got another question for you here. How has the pandemic affected your craft and the way you engage your craft? And I think I'm going to start with you, Carter.
Yeah, sure. We were just talking about this a little bit before this started, but I mean, I guess it's not so much my craft, but my book came out in 2020, so in May. So the pandemic very much affected my book tour. I was planning to read at bookstores and organizations around the country, and all that had to be moved over to the virtual sphere. And it's been good, but I miss having that real sort of physical and direct engagement with readers and just meeting people and signing books. I think, I think it's probably very different for Sam, but as a writer, it's just like I'm home often in my office in the house alone writing. Like that sort of, there's not as much kind of collaboration. So in some ways, it's not that much different in how I'm working. But I do think the kind of darkness and anxiety around this last year that so many of us have been facing, or even these last 4 years, has affected my capacity to create. And I'm just learning to be, I guess, more patient with myself. And when it feels too difficult to write, to really produce, I'm trying to take that time to regenerate and replenish myself by reading others' novels or poetry, or, finding inspiration in other forms of art.
I would imagine that as a writer that you do spend a lot of time in solitude and research, and I think that would probably be the case for most writers. And so there's probably a certain comfort level that you have, but then all of a sudden when your options to interact personally are limited or curtailed, I'm sure that does begin to affect the way you look at the time that you spend with yourself engaged in your craft. So thank you for bringing that to the forefront there, because I do think isolation has been one of those things that has affected us all, our mental health. So thank you. Bob, let's go with you here. How's the pandemic affected your craft?
Well, I work alone too, at home. And so that part hadn't changed, but as Carter was saying, the bleakness and overpowering anxiety has of the last 4 years, as well as the last year, have definitely put a dent in my spirit. But I find that hunkering down and calling into play all of our survivor skills, is has come to be something sort of joyous and celebratory, and stripping away down to what we really need, who we really need, and what we really want out of life, can be really cathartic. And but I want to remind people this is not the first pandemic. And and the haunting ghosts that come around with this pandemic compared to the last pandemic are palatable sometimes. And the madness and superstition and the prejudice all comes back almost like a bad LSD trip. And Sam, I wanted to say something to you. We've been waiting a long time to hear those gay love songs, and they sound as important as they could ever sound today.
Bob, thank you for pointing out that the pandemic, with all of its negative repercussions, has given us all individually and as a society an opportunity to sort of reevaluate what it is that we need, what it is that's important to us, what we value, and there's been a real opportunity to reprioritize, I think, for a lot of people, and I do think that many people have taken advantage of that. So, what about you, Sam? How's the pandemic affected your craft?
Well, I hear Carter and Bob say things that really resonate with me. I do feel stripped down emotionally, but it's been a time of looking inward for me. I've really appreciated the stillness in a lot of ways because I was traveling too much. I was on the move too much before this happened. And I'm so lucky that I'm an educator. I'm so fortunate that I have a full-time gig at Berea College, because my friends who are freelance musicians and artists, I have worried for them tremendously. There's like, I belong to a union, the American Federation of Musicians Union, and they have an emergency fund for artists. There are other groups, Music Cares and things like that do things for performers, but the performers who relied on being in the room and singing and dancing with people have had such a time. And so I just want to send our strength and solidarity to them, because I admire them keeping going, producing their art, teaching virtually things that you didn't even think could be taught virtually, you know, and just I'm amazed by the creativity that's come out of this time. And yeah, it's been a real time of research, because I, of course, you know, was born after the AIDS pandemic had died down considerably. That's a terrible choice of words, but so the AIDS pandemic was fading, and I needed to learn, you know, through Carter's novel, The Prettiest Star, and through the stories that Bob is telling, and, you know, the AIDS Quilt Project and other things. I needed to learn about those things, and this has given me time to do that, in part.
It sounds like all of you have really taken advantage of the opportunities that the pandemic has presented to us, and you've been able to really turn that into something very positive, not only for yourselves, but also through the use of your craft and how it's touching other people. So I have one final question here, and then once we've heard from everybody, I do want to remind the attendees, if you have any questions, to please raise your hand. I do want to remind you that there's an evaluation in the chat, and then I'm hoping that Sam will sort of send us off with some of his music here. So my final question for you today is, what is the one piece of practical advice that you'd give to someone who wanted to use their craft to advance understanding and acceptance in the LGBTQ plus community? And Carter, how about we start with you?
Oh, okay. Let's see. I think, well, this is coming from a very specific writing perspective, but I think if you're writing and you have that you can sort of start with the specificity of your experience and think about your characters, and not necessarily write a message, if that makes sense. That is, like, if you write the story, then what you want to say, the ideas will come out of that. I also think it's good for us to write all of our queer characters, but not make them too good. That is, to be memorable, they have to be flawed and be human. And I guess one other thing I would say is, and this is something that I'm still learning, but I think we have to be true to our art and tell our stories, and that you don't have to write to a larger sort of straight audience. You write your story and tell your story, and they will either catch up or they won't. But you tell the story in the way that's unique to your voice and your experience. Just try to stay true to your art.
Thank you. I think that's great advice. Bob?
I would encourage artists to, first off, get out there and experience a rich gay life. And I mean, it can be wonderful to write about an imaginary gay life, but I think that give yourself the opportunity to get out there and make a lot of big mistakes and explore life and relationships in a way that remembering that this is the kind of thing that was denied us for so many years and so many generations, and it's not just an opportunity. It's a challenge to get out there and live a rich gay life, and draw from that experience instead of an armchair gay life.
I really like that point. I think each generation really it's incumbent upon them to build upon the work of those who have come before, and so it is a challenge to that next generation. And when it's their turn, they'll challenge the next to move things forward. So I think that's right. Sam, what kind of advice would you give? What practical advice would you give?
I feel like such a student, like Carter and Bob are people that I look up to. And so, but I would say that you can find a balance between your safety and your openness. You can find a balance between your identities, you know, if you're a person of color, if you're a disabled person, an LGBTQ plus person, an Appalachian person, a rural, urban, you know, you can be both and, you know, you can be, or like Whitman said, you can contain multitudes. You know, I think that that's what I did not know when I was first coming out, you know, that, well, maybe the sissy qualities of me had some value, you know, that maybe being sensitive and more on the femme side helped me listen and absorb things differently. And there's, yeah, I just want to heap all of our strength on the next generations of queer artists, because they have quite a job to do and they're up for the task.
Well, I would agree with you. I believe they are. And I think the authenticity of the lives that all three of you have led are really instructive for the generation now and for generations to come. And so I really appreciate this. Sam, would you mind to play a little music for us and tell us what you're going to share?
Yeah. So I want to sing you a song written by my dear friend Lara Helene, who is from Mount Sterling, Kentucky. And if you don't know Lara Helene, write that name down. I'll put it in the chat right now so we can all see her name. She's an incredible young songwriter and an activist. Also, she's been involved with band Conversion Therapy Kentucky, those efforts, and Sexy Sex Ed, and many other amazing activist work. So this is a song that she wrote from her own experience. It's called Simple Southern Life. And it's just going to take me just 1 minute to get set up here. I was raised at this country store, shooting shit with my grandpa's friends and talking about being poor, eating biscuits and gravy while they ask, how is school? Have you found yourself a girl yet? I just play it cool, because there's so much they don't know about me. And there's so much I'm so used to hiding. I want my simple southern life, bluegrass picking every Saturday night, hot coffee on a Sunday morn. No, I won't ask for more, except a beautiful man to hold my hand. Loving him feels right. I want the freedom to love and be myself while I live a simple southern life. It's my life. It's hard to find belonging when your love sets you apart. I wouldn't change how I was brought up, but I can't change my heart. I've known since I was young that I am not the same. The same folks who taught me love are the ones who taught me shame. And there's so much they wish they didn't know about me. And there's so many truths that they can't stop denying about my simple southern life. Football games every Friday night, hot fire in a winter storm. No, I won't ask for more, except a beautiful man to hold my hand. Loving him feels right. I want the freedom to love and be myself while I live a simple southern life. Bust down that closet door. I can't hide anymore. The weight upon my shoulders. Right, I never meant to hurt you, but it's been killing me. The weight upon my shoulders. I'm finally free to live my simple southern life, make love to him every single night. Hot coffee on a Sunday morn. No, I won't ask for more, except a beautiful man to hold my hand. Loving him feels right. I want the freedom to love and be myself while I live a simple southern life. It's my life.
Well, Sam, you certainly got to me there. That was an absolutely beautiful song and beautiful performance of that song. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you, Lara Helene. She's the one.
Well, this concludes our session. I want to thank all of you, Carter, Sam, Bob, for sharing your time with us, your stories, your experiences, and your advice and encouragement for our community.